Hi, you guys. So, welcome back to another mini series. So, we are here at Berry College in Rome, Georgia, and we actually came to see and listen to Ruby Bridges speak. So, if you don't know much about who Ruby Bridges is, she was one of the first African Americans to go to a integrated elementary school, and she went through so much at just the age of 5. I think she was 6 years old, and we got to listen to her speak. We were in this beautiful chapel at Barry, and here is just the chorus. They sung a really beautiful song, I think about 2 songs. And then right after them, we got to watch one of the dance teams in Rome, Georgia dance. I think they were called the Pink Oasis, and they actually danced to the song that was in the Harriet Tubman soundtrack. Um, I cannot think of the name of the song, but if I can remember it, I will most definitely put it down in the caption or in the description box. So they did a beautiful job. I just sped it up a little bit, but it was literally beautiful. They were young and just vibrant, and they were very strong with their moves. So yeah.
Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Ruby. Your journey, can you take us back to that day in 1960 when you walked into William Frantz Elementary School, and tell us about that time? How do you look back on it now?
Well, the one thing I want to definitely remind everyone, I was 6 years old and knew absolutely nothing about what was about to happen. I should go back a little bit. You know, I had already attended kindergarten, which I remember kindergarten. It was an all-black school, and everyone in my school looked exactly like me. My teacher, all of the kids. I loved school. It was my first school experience, and I thought I knew exactly what school was like and what to expect. My parents were sharecroppers, and they were born and raised in a little town called Tylertown, Mississippi, where if you had to get the crops in, you could not go to school. So school was a luxury for them that they really couldn't afford. And I think that had a lot to do with their decision to send me to this all-white school. Even though Brown versus the Board had happened in 1954, we all know that it did not happen with all deliberate speed. And so it wasn't enforced in Louisiana until 1960. So the organization that spearheaded that movement was the NAACP. And they came into my neighborhood, my community, and did a door-to-door search. They were actually looking for 6-year-old kids that would attend 2 schools that were going to be integrated. The Little Rock Nine had already integrated high school in 1957, but now it was time to integrate elementary schools. And so that door-to-door search led to 150 families agreeing to send their 6-year-olds, and my family being one of them. I think when the knock came at the door and the question was asked, would you be willing to send your 6-year-old to one of these newly integrated schools for the very first time in the city? It would allow your children an opportunity to have a better education, possibly even go on to college. I believe that what my mother heard that she was excited about was the offer to her to send her own kids to do something that she was not able to have or to do. And but my father was against it. My father had fought in the Korean War, and he said that even on the battlefield, you could be in a foxhole with a white soldier, and when it was your turn to go onto the front line, were brothers as long as you were in that foxhole together. You had each other's back. You were fighting for the same country. But at the end of the day, you couldn't go back to the same barracks, and you couldn't eat in the same mess hall. And he said that told him that he was still just a colored soldier. That all of those sacrifices that he had made really didn't matter. And my father was a decorated soldier. He was wounded and carried his fellow soldier who had lost his legs back to safety. But when he got home, he was still not able to find work. And so all that, I believe, influenced him. He thought, why subject my child to what could happen going to this integrated school, because it's not going to change things. Things did not change for him, and he didn't believe that it would change for his child, or other people for that matter. But I often say, like most strong Black women, my mother influenced him, and there I was on my way to this new school. But I grew up during a time when kids were pretty much seen and not heard, especially in an African American family. You know, if grown-ups were really having grown-up conversation, you could not be in the same room when they were talking. So I was not privileged to any part of the conversation, knew nothing about what was happening. But I do remember that time. I remember the first day. One thing that happened, that all 150 kids had to be tested to make sure that they were smart enough to go to these new schools. So I remember taking this test, and I remember that because it was the first time that I had taken the streetcar in New Orleans, and that was exciting for me, you know. The reason why it's important to point out those things, I really need you all to keep in mind that what protected me was the innocence of a child. So I was excited about the streetcar ride, not knowing where I was going and why. But I do remember getting there and sitting in a room with lots of kids, and now I know it's 150 kids. We took a test that took all day long to take. I remember that. Finally, it was over. I took the streetcar back home. And a couple of weeks after that, there were people that came over to the house to visit my parents. And in the midst of that conversation, I did hear them say, only 6 kids out of 150 kids were able to pass the test. They made the test extremely hard. The test was really set up to eliminate kids. And we all know that that was the same tactic used when we were trying to register to vote. But what I heard them say is that she is so smart. She passed this test that nobody else could pass. And by the way, all 6 were girls. I love to point that out. Sorry, because if it was going to fail, that's where we would fight amongst ourselves the most. And that indeed did happen. And so those 6 kids were divided up. 3 were assigned to one school and 3 to the other. A couple of days before it was time to go, 2 of those kids dropped out. Their parents decided not to send them. And those 2 kids were assigned to go to the same school that I was going to, because we were divided up by districts. And then my parents got another visit, begging them not to take me out, even though I was going alone. And so my mother again won that argument, and I was still headed to William Frantz Elementary. So the first day came. I was still thinking that I am just about the smartest person in the city. And I remember that all of my parents' friends came over to the house that morning to dress me for school. It seemed like a really, really big deal. And that did not happen on my first day going to kindergarten. So there was something really important about this that was different. I remember that. There was a knock at the door, and my parents opened the door, and 4 very tall white men were standing at the door. And they had yellow bands on their arms. And I remember looking at them and thinking to myself, who are they? And who told them I needed a ride? They didn't show up for kindergarten. So all of this is still going through my mind. We got into the car with them. Basically what they said is, we're U.S. Marshals. We've been sent by the President of the United States. And we're here to escort you and your daughter to school today. And I remember the conversation in the car because they were explaining how we should walk when we got in front of the school. They were saying to my mother that you should let the marshals in the front get out first, then we marshals in the back will surround you. We want you to walk straight ahead and don't look back. And I remembered that. And so we turned a corner. It was a very short drive because this was actually my neighborhood school. The school that I'd gone before for kindergarten was much further away. This was my neighborhood school, but because it was a white school, I wasn't able to go until that day. So the car turned the corner and I saw what most of the country saw. Lots of people standing out in front of the school. And they were screaming and shouting, they were waving their hands and throwing things. Well, I live in New Orleans and we have Mardi Gras. And that happens every year. There's crowds and they're screaming and they're throwing things. And so in my 6-year-old mind, I thought we had stumbled into a Mardi Gras parade. Because that happens and you'll have to sit and wait. Indeed, it was a parade, but it wasn't Mardi Gras. And so when the door opened, they said, walk straight ahead and don't look back, and they rushed me inside of the building. And when I got inside of the building, they took me to the principal's office. I went in and took a seat with my mom, and those 4 marshals stayed right outside the door. But I could see through the windows. And so all of the people that were outside rushed into the building. And as they passed the window, they kept pointing at me. And they were shouting, and their faces looked really angry about something. But I sat there the whole day, and they walked back and forth. When they came back by the window, there were kids with them. And I watched that, I saw that all day. Finally, the bell rang, and the principal came in, and she said, school is dismissed. You can leave. Well, I was really thinking that I'm so smart that no one else could pass the test, that this must be college. That I'm going from kindergarten straight to college, and everybody came out to see this 6-year-old go to college. And I remember when she said, school is dismissed, you can leave, my first thought was, college is easy. All of this is the mind of a 6-year-old. How was I to know that the crowd outside was there to harm me? That they didn't want me there. They didn't know me. I had not done anything. What would even make me think that they were there for me? No 6-year-old would come to that conclusion unless you told them. Unless you explained that to them. And my parents didn't do that. And in hindsight, being a parent myself, I think that was the best decision for them to make. But it speaks to the fact that racism really is a grown-up disease. Each and every one of our babies come into the world with a clean heart, a fresh start in life. That's our gift. It's how we come into the world. And so that means that someone else passes it on to a child. And that is why we are still dealing with racism today. It is a grown-up disease. And so that's what my first day was like. I went home, I remember them chanting 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't want to integrate. And I didn't understand what the word integrate meant. It rhymed, and so my sister and I jumped rope that afternoon. 6, 8. We don't want to integrate. You know,
The innocence of a child.
the innocence of a child.
Well, you talked about your family and their hesitancy to tell you what was going on. Can you talk more about your family's bravery during that time and how that inspired you to do the work that you do now?
Well, you know, they were brave. I understand that now. I don't even think that they were thinking that they were. As I mentioned, you know, my father was definitely against it. He honestly did not feel things were going to change. My mother, I think she really wanted opportunities for her kids that she did not have. And I would have to say that that was probably what every one of those parents were thinking out of that 150. There were repercussions, definitely. You know, they were sharecroppers. They didn't own the land. So my grandparents still lived there in Mississippi. And once the news spread and they found out that it was their granddaughter, they were asked to leave the farm that they had been farming on for 25 years. So they moved from Mississippi to a small town in Louisiana. My father didn't really find work. He ended up becoming a service station attendant. And he lost his job. His boss said, you know, all of my customers are complaining. They know that it's your daughter going to this white school. And they're threatening to boycott my gas station. So I have to let you go. And I distinctly remember that evening because the gas station was right next door to a bakery, and my father would bring home day-old breads and things like that. And that particular night when he came home, the owner of the bakery just gave him bags and bags of breads and donuts, and we were so excited about that until I heard him say that he was fired. And I remember being a little bit sad about that because I thought it was all because of me. So there were definitely repercussions. There were 35 marshals assigned to that whole desegregation process. You had to actually live on the street where we lived to get onto the street. You had to show identification. They changed their phone numbers, you know, many times. So people couldn't really come over to visit. So I think they were pretty much isolated. You know, if you didn't really live on the street, you couldn't get onto it. So I am more than sure that they were very, very nervous about the decision that my mom had made.
Well, you talk about the importance of having those connections, and it was definitely a stressful time for the people around you. Can you tell us more about your relationship with your teacher, Barbara Henry, and what she taught you about allyship and connection?
The second day, when it was time for me to go back to school, same thing happened. Federal marshals came, and we got into the car with them. When we turned the corner, crowds had almost doubled in size. Because the two schools were kept secret. No one really knew which two schools in the city was going to be integrated, except the people that were directly involved. But once the first day happened, then everybody knew which schools had been integrated. And so more protesters came on the second day. When we turned the corner, you know, my mother says all the time that is the day she was the most nervous. They opened the car door, rushed me inside of the building, and when I got inside of the building on the second day, it was different. It was so quiet. You could hear footsteps as we walked up the stairs. And you know, we were told that schools were separate but equal. And even at 6, I knew that was not true. Because the one thing that stuck out was the school was beautiful. It was so much nicer than the school that I'd gone to for kindergarten, which I think still made such an impression on me that, yeah, I thought it was college. It was so much nicer. And so I heard our footsteps. I could see myself in the floors. All of that was different. When we got to the top of the stairs, the principal said, "Your class is down the hall." And those federal marshals, they turned me around. They walked me down the hall to this classroom. When I got to the classroom, the door opened. And when the door opened, this woman stepped out. And she said, "Hi, my name is Mrs. Henry." And my first thought was, she's white. I'd never seen a white teacher before, let alone been one-on-one with a white person. So I remember looking at her and taking all of that in. And she said, "Come in and take a seat." And so I remember looking into the classroom, and all I saw was empty desks. And I thought, well, my mom has brought me to school too early. And indeed, we were too early. Years too early. But I went in and I took a seat. My mother sat in the back of the class, and Mrs. Henry began to teach me. And what I soon came to realize is that Mrs. Henry, even though she looked exactly like the people outside, who had angry faces, she wasn't angry. She was the nicest teacher I ever had. She made school so much fun. I remember my time with her. I knew that if I just got out of the car and into the building, I knew I was going to have a good day. And it was because of her. We did everything together. You could hear the mob outside of the school because they were protesting and boycotting around the school. And she would say, "Oh, today we're going to have music," because they were screaming so loud. And she would go to the window and close the window. And then we would have music. And we would make all sorts of things. I remember making Easter bonnets, and she was just the most amazing teacher. And she made me feel safe, loved, and she just encouraged me. I never missed a day of school, and it was because of her. I think both of us, I think we knew that we had to be there for each other. I was never allowed to go outside because of the crowd. So I didn't really have recess. She would have recess with me in the classroom. I wasn't allowed to go to the cafeteria. I could smell food cooking. I knew that at the other school we would all meet together, and that's where I would make friends. I didn't have any friends. She was my best friend. And we spent that entire year in that classroom together. She actually came from Boston to teach me because teachers quit their jobs. They did not want to teach black kids. But she came from Boston to teach me. She was an amazing teacher. What I now know and understand is that I wasn't sent into that classroom to just study reading, writing, and arithmetic. The lesson I learned, I think the lesson I learned is the exact same lesson Dr. King tried to teach each and every one of us. That you cannot look at a person and judge them. That you have to allow yourself an opportunity to judge a person by the content of their character. You have to allow yourself an opportunity to get to know someone.
Oh, yeah.
And she showed me her heart in that classroom. And even at 6, I knew she looks exactly like the people outside, but she's not. And that I couldn't look at someone and judge them. that if I did that, I might miss out on a very dear friend. And she is my best friend. She's still alive. She still lives in Boston, and she's my very best friend.
So that's beautiful. I'm glad that you kept up that connection. We talk about good relationships and how to really build community here. We introduce that with our good neighbor culture, valuing inclusivity, restoration, and solidarity. And we really want to be good neighbors. That's something that we talk about all the time. And so what advice would you give to communities like ours about fostering belonging and connection?
Well, I was listening to Dr. King speak just the other day, and he said that his hope was that the forces for goodwill, whether they be white or black, his hope is that we would come together under the name of goodwill to work together, to move this country closer to equality and justice for all. And I so believe in that, especially now, today, with everything that we see playing out before us. I believe that each and every one of us who are a part of that force for goodwill, we need to be doing something good. No matter what it is, you need to be doing something good. Because in my heart, I believe that what we see playing out before us today has absolutely nothing to do with the color of our skin. Nothing. And whenever I say that, the faces, I can see the faces even in this room. It's like that's a shock. And that's when I know that what I have to point out is that no one in this room today can believe that you can only trust your own kind. You can only trust people that look like you. Nobody in this room can believe that. Because you see exactly what I see. I believe there is a them and us today. But the them and the us has nothing to do with what we look like. It's good and evil. That's what we're faced with today. That is the fight today. I say that you see what I see. You see evil at work. Evil goes into our schools, our universities, hospitals, churches, movie theaters, music festivals. Evil goes in to do its dirty work. And I believe even today, God forbid if we were faced with evil walking through that door, I don't believe evil would be picking and choosing. Evil's job is going to be to come into this room, to take out as many of us as possible, as quickly as possible. Because evil will not know which one of us will intervene and get them first. That shouldn't be something that you need to be reminded of. But I'm here to remind you. Evil comes in all shades and colors. And that is the fight that we are in today. And I believe what Dr. King said is even more relevant right now today than it was when he said it. Forces of goodwill should come together. We all need to be doing something good so that we, as good people, can be accounted for just like evil. We don't do that, we are not going to win this fight that we are in today. And I am not speaking to you just as the Ruby Bridges you think you know. I am speaking to you as a mom who's lost a son, who was also murdered by someone that looked exactly like him. He shook their hand and said, "Oh, you hit the car, but there's no damage." Turned to walk away, and he was shot and murdered. And I realized that this message that I have been carrying with me all across this country is even more important today than it ever was. Because the fight we're in has nothing to do with the color of our skin. And we have to see that, or we're not going to win. And we need to do it for the next generation. Dr. King said, "I might not live to see it." But he didn't stop working at it, toward it. He remained hopeful. And there's so many people, both black and white, who came together during the Civil Rights Movement to move us forward, both black and white. When we think about history and banning books, we're wiping out the good that people did also. You want to know the truth? Go to a civil rights museum. Because history isn't really being taught in schools the way that history happened. Go to a civil rights museum. You'll see the people who were on the bus as freedom riders, both black and white, that were beaten, bombed. 3 young men, both black and white, who were murdered in Mississippi trying to help African Americans vote. The woman who was white driving a black man after helping him left her hometown in Detroit to go down to Mississippi to help so that we could register to vote. You see, I know this because I had to look for myself. Because after that year was over, and I had questions about why me? How did this happen? What was it about? I was 6. But when I went back to school thinking I would find the answers in my history books, it wasn't there. It was like it never happened. When I started this journey, or this calling, because I do believe it's a calling, I wanted to talk to kids. Because I thought that they needed to know the truth. Because I was searching for myself. And I didn't find the truth about the Civil Rights Movement until I went to a Civil Rights Museum. You see, because I'd been taught by my best friend, a teacher, who was really like another mom to me. She was there for me. So what I was hearing, that the civil rights movement was all about one race against the other, that didn't make sense to me. I needed to find the truth. And I didn't find it in my history books. There was no Black History Month then. I had to go and look for it myself. Can you imagine my surprise when I went to that Civil Rights Museum? And I saw all the stories that I just mentioned to you. It was like, I'm not wrong. I was right. You can't look at a person and judge them. You have to get to know them. Because good and evil, right and wrong, comes in all shades and colors. And that is what's playing out before us today. Because we refuse to see that. Now, mind you, I wish this upon no one. But if you learn that lesson the way that I had to, by losing a child, that would be very unfortunate. Because that pain never goes away. So my message to you today is what I believe Dr. King tried to teach all of us. Judge one another by the content of your character. This fight that we're in has nothing to do with what we look like. It is just a tool to divide us.
Well, thank you for that.
So every summer, I would have to go back to my grandparents' farm. And my mother, one of 9, she had 6 sisters, it was 7 of them. And all of us went back to the farm every summer. That was our summer camp. My grandmother had a green thumb. She was the one that grew all of the crops that she sold, and my aunts and my mom would have to help her to preserve them and can them and bring food back home to feed us. Those were the richest summers for me, spending them together on the farm with my cousins. Every one of my aunts had at least 8 or 9 kids. So there were almost 40 of us every summer together. And I learned so much. And it was such a rich experience. And I do understand that there's so many kids today who never get a chance to leave their communities and neighborhoods. And so I'm starting my own line of summer camps. The first one will open in July. It will be in North Carolina, where I bring kids from surrounding schools across the country that I've built a relationship with. And some of those kids will come from the North Carolina area. And it is all about bringing kids together in the hopes that they too will look at each other, get to know one another, and decide whether or not they like each other, and it won't have anything to do with what they look like. So that is what my foundation is really dedicated to doing today.
Awesome. Can you tell us more about what our community, especially students, can do to tap into all the work that your foundation is doing?
Just go onto the website, we're working on that as well, and, I could use all the help I can get. So, I really appreciate the opportunity today.
You talked about the power of stories and how we can all work together, and the problem is deeper than our skin color. How do you think storytelling and art can inspire change and keep the history of the civil rights movement alive?
Oh, look at the Norman Rockwell painting. I mean, You know, I sat on the board of the Norman Rockwell Museum. That particular painting was done, well, it was actually published in '64. I think he did it before then, but actually Norman Rockwell wanted to make a statement that there was about 4 of his paintings that really spoke to the political climate in the country at the time. One is Moving Day, where a black family is moving into a white neighborhood for the very first time. There's also the problem we all live with, the one that I am in. And then there's one of the 3 young men that had gone down to Mississippi, and they were murdered. It's a very, very powerful one that you very seldom see. You would probably have to go to one of his exhibits or go to the museum to really see it. But it depicts that act that was committed then. He wanted to make these political statements so that people would be aware of what was happening in our country at the time. And so the one that I am in is the most popular one. I do believe that it came up for sale in 1970, if I'm not mistaken. They only wanted $20,000 for it, and no one would purchase it. And now it is priceless. And I do believe that the statement that he made then is definitely still getting attention today. So, as I mentioned, I believe that each and every one of us, there is something we can do in the name of good, no matter what it is. All of us should be doing something.
All right, if you had to leave the audience with one thing, what would you tell them?
I would say that all of us should try to tap into that child's heart that you came into the world with. If you can find it. I know mine is still there. That little girl still lives inside me. She keeps saying, if you just explain it to them, like a 6-year-old, they'll get it. And that keeps me going. Honestly, guys, we can do this, and we should do this. You should stop seeing it the way people want you to see it. And see it the way it is. Has nothing to do with what we look like. Thank you.